So this talk is called 10 Things You Don't Know About YAML. And my name is Ingy.net, and I live in Seattle, and I have a little consulting partnership called We Street, and we take on good and interesting projects, and it's just me and a partner. It's been pretty good so far doing that for the last 2 years, and my current new contract is with Liquid Web, which is a web hosting provider out of East Lansing, Michigan. But some old friends of mine work there, and there's some good people there. So I invented YAML, which is it's a very precise statement. Like you guys all attended Openwest, but you were not the attendees of Openwest. That's a lot more people. So there were 3 people that invented YAML, and I was one of them. And so I can say that I invented YAML, but if I were to say I am the inventor of YAML, that would be disingenuous. So, and we say that because I once said that on the worst place to say that ever, which was Slashdot, and then I just got flamed to hell for it. Okay, so YAML is actually a very deep subject, believe it or not, but most people, probably many of the thousands of you in this audience included, learned it in 5 minutes because at some level it is very simple. So I call this talk 10 Things You Don't Know, but I don't really know what you know. So I came up with 60 things that I think you might not know, and hopefully at least 10 of those are things that you don't know. So you're encouraged to keep a tally if you want. If you just have a little pen in front of you, I know that, and we could trade notes at the end. I'm not sure how many people use computers during their talk, but if you have a question and you're kind of it'll be hard to tell me the YAML that you actually want to tell me about. So if you can make a gist of it and join #YAML on irc.freenode.net if you're an IRC type of person. How many people use IRC at all? Okay. And how many people have used GitHub gists or some kind of no paste? So you know the drill. Okay. So let's start with number 1. What is YAML? This is going to be a very interactive talk. I know it's hard to interact with thousands of people, but I'm going to try. But this one I'll just answer, and you can just mark whether you thought you knew it or not. So YAML is a data serialization language. That's its purpose. That's what it is. That's, if you read Wikipedia article, that's what it will say it was, at least last time I checked. Now, is XML a serialization language? Yay or nay? Anybody? What do people think?
It's not a good one.
That's a good answer, actually. No, and if you go to Wikipedia, it would say that it's a markup language. And that's what it was meant to be. It's a text markup language, but then, when something becomes popular, people start using it for everything. And there was a time when people were trying to put all of their data into XML back in the 90s, and some people still do it, but it's not a great use of XML, which is otherwise, it has very many great uses, but that's data serialization is not one of them. To your point that it's not a good one, English is a serialization language. I mean, you can, as long as you can put it into characters, you could describe a data structure in Python well enough in English that it could be recreated in Python, but it's not a good one. So, is JSON a serialization language? Yay or nay?
Yay.
Yay? Nay.
Damn it.
It's a data interchange language, and so, but people do serialize things with JSON, so it can be used for certain well-defined points of serialization, and it's actually very good for the most common serialization operations. But when you talk about a serialization language, you talk about something in memory that you can write out to some format and then bring it back in later. And usually in the old days, those were binary formats that, like Python had pickle, and any Python object that you threw at it, it would save it somehow on disk. Well, almost any. I mean, those usually fell down when you passed them code references and stuff. I can't remember if pickle did code references and how dangerous that was to actually do that. So what problem was YAML originally trying to solve? Anybody? Data serialization, maybe? Wrong, that, if you thought that. XML. So there's, in the year 2001, probably in the end of 2000, there's these two guys, Clark and Oren, and they were a part of the SML dev mailing list, which was something that came and went, I believe. And so their purpose of this mailing list was to make XML, this burgeoning, colossal thing that was in everybody's face, simpler in some way. And so they were just talking about it. And at some point, Clark made a marked departure with something that eventually became YAML. And he got YAML.org and coined that term YAML. Which when I heard that word, I couldn't stop saying it for weeks. It was just such a fun word to say, so I liked it. So who created YAML? I think we know by now. We said that there's three. It was me and Clark and Oren. And we spent 5 years doing it. I mean, it's not like it's just something we did one weekend. It was a long process. We fought about everything. In fact, no three people ever agreed on any proposal, and we had to actually bargain. And that's not really a great language design strategy, you know, because sometimes you'll just make up weird stuff to use as like kind of a bargaining point, and then it gets accepted because somebody else is trying to bargain for something, and then it stays in the language. And that happened in a couple of places. So, is YAML a strict subset of JSON?
No.
Of course not. No. Yeah, absolutely. Is YAML a strict superset of JSON?
Is that up for debate?
Well, no. The answer is yes, and the reason it's not up for debate is because I have a Wikipedia article to prove it. So if we go to this one, you can make it up for debate in a few seconds, but when I checked an hour ago, it said YAML version 1.2 is a superset of JSON. Prior versions were not strictly compatible, for example, so yes. Okay. So what years were YAML and JSON invented? Anybody?
JSON 2001.
Okay. Any others? YAML? No guesses? Take a guess, because you took a guess on that one.
2006.
Okay, interesting. Any others?
1985.
Very close, very close. That's not a... Is anybody a Ruby programmer? No. If you were, you'd know Aaron Patterson. You might know him anyway. He maintains the left-hand side of Ruby, basically. He just does about everything, including Rails. And I thought you were him because I can't really see that far, but you're not. He lives in my neighborhood. We live about a mile apart, so which is interesting because he's the YAML maintainer for Ruby currently. And when they had all those Rails attacks, we got together at a cafe and sorted things out a couple of years ago. Well, okay, so according to Wikipedia, they were both started in 2001. I know for a fact that YAML was started April 22nd, 2001. I don't know when JSON was started. According to Wikipedia, it was kind of talked about in 2001, wherever Douglas Crockford was working, and I think he wrote a lot of that article. It seems like it. I've met Douglas. He's nice. But it became popular in 2005. That's when Yahoo started using it as a format, and it just kind of became wildly popular right around 2005. And that's when we noticed it at YAML, at the YAML company. 2003 is when YAML really took off in Ruby. If you're a Ruby programmer, you know that it was shipped with the core. And so, okay. And so for the new people, we're kind of this is 10 things you don't know about YAML, but it's really about 60 or 70 things, and I think at least 10 of them you probably don't know. So if you want to, I challenge people to keep score. Also, if you join Tom YAML on irc.freenode.net and you have a question that you want to pose as a YAML document, you can no paste or gist something there and tell me about it, and I'll go over there and get it. Okay. Oops. How did Ingy get involved in YAML? David, don't answer this.
I wasn't reading when you
Oh, okay. Do you know?
So,
Was it a data center Perl module?
You didn't read quite precise enough when I went forward. It's the data denter Perl module, which I wrote in early April 2001. And actually, we should look at it. So, and I just wrote this on my own. I was working at ActiveState. Who's heard of that company? They put Perl on Windows, and then they hired all the best Perl and Python guys. Well, not the best, all of the best, but a few of the best ones. And it was kind of the center for a couple of years of Perl and Python development. And so I'm around these guys, and I was like, wow, you know, indented stuff looks really good, and there should be, a YAML serializer, a full serialization thing, because in Perl had data dumper, and it just dumped stuff out as Perl, and I was like, well, it looks kind of klutzy. I could clean this up, and I mean, this is going to look terrible now, but can you imagine writing your config files like there's some up at the top is. Yeah, so that's some data denter. It uses fat arrows instead of colons, and can do all kinds of weird references. And it uses % for the key of a hash in the front, kind of a Perly thing. But somebody out there saw data denter, and they saw this weird YAML from the SML mailing list, and they put us together. And we traded an email with Clark. And then we got on the phone for like 2 hours, and we were just engrossed in it. And then we never didn't talk to each other for the next 5 years. Every day, we're working on this thing. Okay. So, have Clark, Oren, and Ingy ever met in the same room at the same time?
No.
Okay. You said yes? Yes. The answer is yes. I've met both of them several times, and I think they probably met each other once or twice in different parts of the world. Clark was from the East Coast, I was from the West Coast, and Oren was from Israel. And but he actually his wife was from Port Townsend, which is outside of Seattle where I live. So he was, for a couple of years, he was there fighting over custody of their child. He's a genius now. Shakov Ben Kiki is one of the recipients of the Donald Knuth bank thing. Does anybody know that? If you find an errata in Donald Knuth's books, he gives you he has a bank account based on some weird, yeah, he sends you some weird check in some currency he made up. That's about all I know. Yeah, so we met in Portland, Oregon for a week in my living room, and we just hammered out a lot of the last final details of YAML there. Okay, what language was the first YAML processor written in? Correctamundo. Yeah, at some point I was like, I don't really like talking, I like coding, so I just coded one up. It's probably the worst one ever written, and it's still in popular use today. So which language made YAML a success? I think we already went over this. Ruby, although Python really made it. So Ruby shipped it as core. The whole Ruby community just glommed onto it really early, shipped it as core, started writing stuff about it, giving talks about it. But it wasn't until the best implementation came out of the Python land, and that was a couple years later. So how many YAML parsers are written in C? 23. None? 23, 42, 123. Oh, that's a good one, yeah. It's a better number than 20. Although 23 was Psychic TV's favorite number, if anybody remembers that. 2 that I know of, and I should, libyaml and libsic. Which came first, libyaml or libsic? You're kind of right, but not really. Libsic came first, but somebody attempted to write something called libyaml in 2000. It was one of my ActiveState buddies, and he failed miserably. And And so libsic was written in 2003, and that's supposed to be libyaml was written in 2006. I wrote all this like a minute ago. Which is faster of the two? Yeah, why would you know? I don't know. I really don't know. I think it depends on the YAML that you're parsing. I think libsic is more incorrect, so it's a little bit faster. But if you give it some pathological YAML, then I think it slows down severely. That's what I think. Which parsing style do they use, these two C processors? I don't know. That's kind of a vague question, but I'll just give the answer since it's too hard. So libyaml is a streaming parser. As it goes through the YAML stream, it can parse infinitely long YAML or non-terminating YAML because it fires events as it's doing things, and you could do interesting stuff with that. Libsic can't do that because it's an inside-out parser. So what that means is that when you see a hash or a dictionary, it just makes note of it, and then it finds all of the contents depth-wise, and then when you finish that particular node, then it reports it. So it's, the parser people didn't really like it, but it made it into the world first and was heavily used and still is used. So you can't really fault it for that because writing a YAML parser in C was an incredibly huge task. So who wrote this thing? Does anybody know? It's kind of a famous person. Y wrote it. So why is it called sick? Anybody? Well, Y was very sick when he wrote it, actually. And so he took sick and put the letter Y for YAML in it, and that's what he called it. So who is Y? Anybody know who Y is? Yeah, he's Y the Lucky Stiff was his full moniker. That's what he went by. And he is a poignant Ruby programmer. And he has this book that we should just look at it because it's too cool to not look at. So this is kind of the page 1 of the book, just all in pictures, and then you turn the page down here. And it's a heavily illustrated. Yeah, there we go. Y drew the first logo for YAML, which was like before YAML and after YAML. It was like chickens like tumbling over because they couldn't walk around, and then YAML like made them all happy. And he's a really weird guy. So where is Y? Salt Lake City. Well, he was in 2003 when I came through town. We were already talking on IRC, and I kind of knew that he was in Salt Lake. So I said, hey, I'm driving from Chicago to Seattle. I could stop by. And so we had a cup of coffee at a Sherry's somewhere off the highway, and they have Sherry's, and I'm not making that up, right, in Salt Lake. It's like the Denny's restaurant. Maybe it was a Denny's. Yeah, maybe it was a Denny's. Maybe that's just a Seattle thing. So who wrote libyaml? This is a little bit maybe not interesting, but Kirill Siminoff wrote it. So why? No, Kirill. All right, so why did Kirill write libyaml? It was a Google Summer of Code project in 2006, and he was just a young guy at that point, and he whipped it up, and it was probably the best C code I've ever seen in my entire life. Okay, so does YAML have an RFC? Yay or nay? Nay is correct. Is YAML an Oasis project?
What's an Oasis project?
They're kind of like this governing body of formats. They basically own XML. And what?
Then the answer has to be no.
It's definitely no. So this guy writes me from Oasis a couple years ago, and he's like, hey, would you like to become an Oasis project? And I was like, not really. I mean, we've gotten along fine without you guys. And I'm like, what would be involved? They're like, well, you give us the domains. And I'm like, I don't think it's going to work that way. And anyway, I don't think that he put up a fight. He just kind of went away. But his theory was that YAML was becoming so important that we could just change it and destroy the whole world. But that's just ridiculous. I mean, that's not how open source works. If somebody does something wrong in the open source world, then somebody forks it and moves on and does the right thing. Okay, does YAML have a foundation? The YAML foundation. No is correct. Although my friend who works, he was like a VP at HP, and a hardcore hacker too, was suggesting that possibly I go down that route, but not yet. Does YAML have a spec?
Yes.
Oh yes, it's a massive spec. And it just goes on and on and on. I'm going to tell you a little secret. Well, I can phrase it as a question. Has Ingy ever read the entire spec? No. I figured that if I argued on every point, I should know it just internally that I don't need it. Okay, so is the spec simple? No. Which is more correct, libyaml or the YAML spec? Yes?
Why is it so complicated?
Because to make something simple to humans. So the point of YAML was really, I said it was for data serialization, but that's not quite the whole story. It was for something, data serialization that your mom could use was kind of the point. We wanted to make stuff really, really simple. But then at the end of the day, when you make that and you allow simplicity, you allow strings to not be quoted most of the time, you end up with a lot of edge cases. And when you're an OCD Israeli guy who needs to spec everything to perfection, then that would be Oren and Clark. I was more of just, let's make this something that's really simple for the world to use. And they were more like, this has to be thought out at every level. And so they would write an RFC. I kind of pushed against it, but so this one depends what you think of. It's the spec is the spec, so it's the spec, right? But Kirill, read through every inch of the spec, implemented it perfectly, except for when he said this is bollocks, and I'm not going to do that because it would just not be a good thing to do. I think from an open source thing, I trust libyaml more than I trust the spec, and when they vary, I bring it to the attention. If it hasn't already been discussed there's a mailing list. I bring it up there. Okay. So why aren't hard tabs allowed for YAML indentation? Nobody's going to dare answer it because my answers are all so silly, and this one's really silly. Because we love you. And so we tried for 3 months, about 8 hours a day, every day, trying to make tabs work with YAML. We tried every possible permutation, and they just always cause pain. And so we came up with this novel idea of, let's just leave them out completely. And if you actually Google for why YAML sucks, about 95% is people want tabs for indentation, which I think is a bit ridiculous. But, okay. So what's the current version of the YAML spec? This is an easy one. 1.2, yes. Okay, what did 1.2 add over 1.1?
Resolve inconsistencies between YAML and allowing JSON to be a subset of it.
Yeah, so when we became aware of JSON, we looked at it and we're like, oh my God, well, this little known part of YAML is that we support at any level this flow form, which is curly braces and square braces. We use colons and we use double quotes, and we're like, JSON is a subset of YAML, and we looked at it really hard, and we're like, oh yeah, actually, in these 3 places, it's not. So we fixed. What did they say? In Office Space, we fixed the glitch. Yeah.
What was the 3 places?
Oh, I can give you an example of one, but it might show up later in the talk. But so key value is separated by colon, but it's actually separated by colon space. So there has to be a white space character after the colon, but that's not the case in JSON. But keys, keys of a hash in JSON can only be strings. And all strings are double quoted. So we said, hey, if the key is double quoted and it's followed by a colon, then it has to be, there's certain things where colons show up and you want them to be part of the string, not a separator. URLs come to mind. But they never have double quotes around the HTTP part. So we realized that it would be really easy to say, we'll make an exception that it doesn't need a space after the colon if the colon comes after a double quoted string. That's one of them. Yeah. Things like that, just little tiny minor things. Oh, and we had a 1024 key limit, and we took that out. So which C libraries of those two support YAML 1.2? None of them do. It's very sad and point. I'm sad about it. So what does YAML stand for? Most people know, maybe.
YAML ain't markup language.
Yes, that's true. So what does YAML stand for?
It's recursive.
It is recursive, but it stands for yet another multi-column layout. These fuckers, sorry, I'm not allowed to say that. Can you scratch that out of the video? No. These nice people from Germany saw that YAML.de was available, and so they're like, oh, we'll just call it, why didn't they call it YAMCL? I don't know, but, so they started this thing, never talked to us, and until a couple years ago, when they emailed me and says, hey, I see that YAML.org is your main site, but you own YAML.com, would you give it to us? And so what was my reaction? I don't, I'm not going to raise the middle finger on the tape, but I was like, hell no. But then we had some more email conversation, and it's like, these guys aren't bad. I mean, they stepped on some toes, but whatever. I can get past that. So they made this site, and I hosted it on YAML.com for as long as I want to keep it. Actually, it was down this morning, and I hope that it's the DNS on this thing has resolved. Okay. I'm going to have to describe the site because there's a DNS glitch this morning that I resolved, and on the Wolverine the Wi-Fi, it hasn't resolved. So they made this nice Yinyang site, and it has a little description of YAML, the data serialization language, on the left, and on the right is a thing of their CSS framework. And if you stretch it out, it flips to top and bottom. It's kind of cool, and it uses their framework. And it says two projects, one name in the title. So it's just kind of a nice pointer to both of them. Yeah, and that's how people in open source should, solve arguments or things like that. So it worked out as a win-win. Although, if a YAML Foundation comes along, actually, I looked at their site today, and they haven't updated their copyright since 2013. So they might have gone on and done other things or changed their name. I mean, their site's still up, but it doesn't look like they're active. So who uses YAML? Well, who in this audience has used YAML? I suppose you've all used it once or twice. Pretty much everyone. I mean, I remember going to a Perl conference 4 years ago, and every talk showed a piece of YAML or mentioned the word YAML, but they never said the word YAML. It was just there, it was just a part of what they were showing, which had nothing to do with YAML as a project. So Ansible is a company. Who knows Ansible from the Python world? The only way that you work with Ansible, as far as I know, is through YAML files. That's their whole business. And they're a huge business. They have conferences around the world. I mean, they've really grown as a company. They're in the whole salt. Yeah. You use YAML as well, as I started digging into your stuff. Yeah, so SaltStack is the newest of the Chef, Puppet, Ansible. I mean, I'm sure that you differentiate at some level, but basically machine configuration type of stuff. And Chef and Puppet probably use YAML. I don't know. I don't use any of those technologies, although
Chef uses a custom language and as well.
oh, they use their own DSL?
Yeah, they use their own DSL.
Okay, thank you. So I was just in Berlin for some Perl QA hackathon, and I visited the Travis offices. I didn't even know they were in Berlin, and I went over and talked to them, and they were really great guys, small company. They use YAML as the front end for users interacting with their stuff. And I was 3 years ago, I was at OzCon and saw Mark Shuttleworth, the creator of Ubuntu and Canonical, and he's like talking about his new pet project, and he's like, yeah, and you can export the whole thing in YAML. And I was like, yes. So who talks about YAML? Well, we know, nobody. This is 10 things you don't know about YAML, but I'm giving about 60 to 70 things, and hopefully 10 of them you don't know already. I think maybe everybody's past 10 now, because they were pretty obscure. But we'll get into some actual code in a second here. So, yeah, so we have this tiny IRC channel. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just curious if at some point we could, in the talk, get to the infinite stream capacity of YAML. I'm really interested in that.
Oh, okay, we did talk about that briefly. Were you here for that? So libyaml, when we were comparing libyaml and libsic,
Yes.
I'll get to that in a second, actually. Yeah, so there's not much to talk about because people don't really have a problem with it, or they just hate it. When I said I invented YAML, I was either going to say you're welcome or I'm sorry, because it's, I just see stuff fly by all the time of hate and love. So what format is YAML.org in? Anybody? Yes, YAML, of course. I actually checked that it parsed this morning, and it does parse. Although I checked in some web parsers of it, and they got the parsing wrong. What CSS framework does YAML.com use? Well, if the DNS resolves, it uses the other YAML. There's a second YAML. YAML.de is yet another multi-column layout CSS framework. They decided that reusing our name was perfectly fine. And anyway. So how many major Perl YAML frameworks are on CPAN? What are the major ones?
It's probably 5 that I can name. There's one that's based on SIG. There's the original. There's a tiny.
And then there's the libyaml, the XS. There's 4. And so I'm going to show you this site that I wrote myself. It's kind of rough yet, but we can type in some example YAML here. So, and this tests all of them. And it turns out that they don't all load the same. And in fact, often some of them load, like this is supposed to be invalid. But this one loads it. So it's problematic. I mean, that's one of the big fall downs of YAML, is that it's so complex that the parsers across the board treat things differently. And it's a fixable problem, and I have ways of fixing it. I'll talk about that at the end, but it's the current state. Okay. So this is most people, if you use YAML, might know this. How many scalar forms does YAML have? That means string forms. Does anybody know what I mean by that? There's like single quoted and double quoted. Those are 2. There's 5. So there's no quotes. There's single quoted, double quoted. There's literal block, which is like a here document where the new lines count at the end. And then there's folded block, which is like HTML, where it all just kind of wraps together. But if you put a blank line in the middle, that forces in a folded block, that forces a hard new line. So, what kinds of data structures? Now I'm using these words when I double quote them because kind is actually a word used from the spec. And I'll throw out the answer. So it's really simple. It's just like JSON, mappings, sequences, and scalars. And those are the names that we use in the YAML spec for them, but they have other names: hashes, dictionaries, associative phrase, arrays, lists, string, number, Boolean, those kind of things. Obvious. So here's what do people think? What kinds of data can be used as hash keys in YAML? Of those 3, scalars, arrays, or hashes. No, all of them. So any node can be a key or a value, and that's actually seems a little bit weird. Like, why would you do that? Well, it turns out in Ruby you can do that. In Python you can half do it. You can use arrays or lists as keys, but that's about it. Or maybe it's what? Tuples. Oh, you can't use lists because tuples are immutable. Right. So you can use any immutable data structure. You're right. Thank you. I learned something. One. And Perl, you can only use strings, but we didn't want, we wanted to cater to the future, and that seemed the most abstract. What does YAML have that JSON doesn't? So syntax-wise, it has a lot of different stuff. Comments, yes. I don't even have that, so 2. You're getting it. But in a model way, JSON is hashes, arrays, and strings, and the hashes can only have strings as keys. So what YAML adds is tags, which are used as types. So you can have any node can be of any type. It adds aliases and anchors, so you can have references, circular data. You can't do that in JSON. You can use non-string mapping keys. You can use any node, and you can also have multiple documents in a YAML stream. So a YAML stream is your infinite thing, or is a file on disk, and the things that you normally load that are one hash or one array or one string at the top, those are called documents. So multi-document streams are supported in YAML. Which was useful if you wanted to do a message queue and send. There's actually a terminating syntax, a ... that YAML uses just for that specific reason. When do you need to quote a string in YAML? And this probably not complete. You can probably add a few to my list here, but mostly it's when the first character is is YAML syntax, but only the first character. Like you can put double quotes around a word in the middle of something, and it's still fine to leave it unquoted. When it contains a colon space, and there's actually places when it wouldn't be ambiguous, but pretty much you can't put a colon space anywhere in a string. We just made it that way. Or when it contains a space hash mark, that's how you do a comment. Yep. Okay. So this is kind of to your point. What does a parser do in the thing parsing? Like if I was going to parse a JSON file, what would people think that meant? Right, that's what people would think. You take the text and turn it into an object in memory. But that's not what it means, and it's a bad word to use. And anywhere that people say that they parse JSON, they probably don't. Okay, so this is what YAML looks like. And who knows about the TCP/IP stack, at least in theory? Everybody's heard that there's a stack of layers that you go through. When you go from file to memory, you go through at least these 5 processes. And different things happen at different levels. So usually Unicode conversion happens from file to in-memory stream. And then you lex that into tokens. And this is where the parsing happens. All a parser does is take a set of tokens and turn those into events. It doesn't turn them into a data structure. Now you can build a tight little thing that does all the lexing and the composing in the same thing and call that your parser. But in YAML land, we call that loading and dumping, the whole stack. So going from a load, and Ruby has adopted this a bit, but Python calls it parsing and stringifying or something like that. But it's kind of not the whole story. And if you really want to get deep into YAML, this is a key point, because different things happen at different levels. Like are multiple keys allowed in YAML? I'm sorry, duplicate keys allowed in a dictionary in YAML? Well, the spec says no, but the spec is wrong, I think, because the spec should just be talking about the syntax. And in the syntax, of course, it's allowed. I mean, you can't disallow it, really. And the parser can't keep any kind of state of what it's seen already, because that's not what parsers do. They just, in an infinite stream, they would need infinite memory to keep all this state. So parsers usually work on infinite streams like you were talking about. Whereas composers can't really work on infinite streams because they would need infinite memory. So like what you can do is just use part of this stack. You can say, I read it, I'll lex it, I'll parse it, I'll do something with it, then I'll emit it and write it out to the next pipe in the line, right? So if you're setting up a streaming pipeline, you could change, you could uppercase all the keys that have an F in them or something like that, as they go through. And so you never have to bring the YAML into memory. And so that's what you would do for infinite streams. And YAML was designed to do that. Okay, so now we get to the good part. We have 10 minutes left for it, but that's fine. Okay, so I'm going to show you some examples. Some may be surprising. They're all meant to either be surprising or errors, and you have to suss out what they are. So number one. Okay, so what does that turn into? And I show the answers in JSON, because JSON's kind of unambiguous. When I can, not always. I can't always do that. This is just it's a dictionary. Yep. But actually, that's not right. So in YAML, and this is a really key point, and probably the biggest thing to take away, or at least I try to get this across, any YAML stream or any YAML document can mean just about anything. It all depends on the schema rules that are being used. And so I'll give an example. Like value might be turned into a number by this schema. It says when you see value, turn it into the number 12. Now, there is no schema language for YAML, so this gets a little bit metaphysical and weird, but in practice, the default schema is about the same as JSON, and only what matters is, so it's supposed to be a cross-language serialization language, and when you go cross-language, that's when schema really matters. But the schema is usually always enforced by code, so if you have a Python dumper and a loader, they use the same schema. In fact, Ruby does a lot of cool, they think it's cool, tricks. They got hacked big time for turning something that starts with a colon into a symbol, which is a special type of data type in Ruby. And it worked out really nice for them until it turns out that loading a symbol causes code execution, and if you craft your YAML right, you can gain access to the machine, no problem. So yeah, any YAML can mean anything, but from now on, we'll go with a strict schema, and that would be a dictionary of 2 keys and 2 values. Okay, so what's that?
It's a node as a key which has a value pass.
Right. This is an error. You can't have a colon space. Remember, we said unquoted in the string, and so. Yeah, without indentation, scope, or curlies, you can't do it.
If I'm looking at the string as being on the right, and then it moves on the left, and it's like that, right?
So the way the parser works is that it would look for the first colon space and say, okay, the thing before it was the key, and everything after it is the value. Now, you're right that it should be, I think it should be in the future, we should allow this, but we don't allow this. You have to put quotes around that. That's just the way it is. Although we showed an example earlier, one of the Perl parsers actually treated it like you wanted to treat it, so, but that's an error. It's a definite error in the spec. Uh-oh, this hasn't happened before. There we go, good. Okay, so what's that? That is just a string. So at the top level, it's just a string that happens to have pluses in the front. So any string that doesn't have anything, a colon space or in the middle or whatever, you can just have a file that's just it's a valid YAML file. It's a scalar at the top level. That's the way it is. This. Is that a... Right, so this was, we already went over this, but that's, the colon needed a space after it to be invalid. And, yep, same thing, doesn't have a space before the, now the space can sometimes be the new line character, so like if you have a pound sign that's all the way at the beginning, that still has a white space character. So that's how we rationalize that thing. How about this? Anybody seen that kind of syntax? This is actually simple syntax. So we know that colon space separate is, it actually is the separator between a key and a value. Question mark is the optional key. We're starting a key here. And you actually need that when you have something like a hash. as your key. You know, that's how you serialize something. If you need to put something really complicated, you put a question mark in front of it and indent it and all that kind of stuff, and that's the key. And then after you see the colon space, that's the value. Okay, how about this? It's actually a few things interesting. 3 interesting things in here. I'm just going to get it. We'll discuss it because it would be too hard for somebody to read out what they thought it was. Okay, so it's an array whose first element is a hash. Okay, so that's called sequence in map. I'm sorry, it's a map and sequence. It's a special rule in YAML that you don't have to start a new line if you have a dash, you can have one key after that because it's just such a common thing that it ends up being really nice. Also, this is called sequences. You would think that they would have to go on a new line for each dash, and you'll actually see examples. You know, people who use YAML that way because they think they have to go down a line and indent, but you can actually collapse them all into one line here. And the other thing is that the dash space counts as indentation, so this is really indented under the DAS. And I write, actually LiveYAML outputs all YAML like that. If you dump something with LiveYAML, it will not over-indent but everybody, all the examples, all of the salt examples, I'm sure, have, you know, space before the dash space, not needed. And, but, you know, oh, another question I have is like, what's the preferred file extension for a YAML file? Well, it's the fact, now it's become YML because everybody's done it, but I hated that from the beginning, but it's a fight that I can't fight anymore. I wanted .YAML because I mean, you know, there's precedent for it, and with like nobody uses HTM anymore, right? I mean, it's like the 3-character file thing is just dead, right? Even like CoffeeScript files are 6-letter extensions, coffee, you know. Okay, how about this? If you're on the YAML mailing list, I brought this up last week because this surprised the hell out of me when I was typing things into my little YAML tester. This is valid YAML, even though it doesn't seem like it should be. The first value is a multi-line value that just happens to have a dash space at the front of one of the lines. And that's how it folds together like that. Okay, so everybody should know that this is what? Yeah, this is a list of 4 things, just like it would be in JSON. It's actually just nicer JSON. So, you know, all JSON is YAML, but it can also be nicer JSON can be YAML too, with comments. Okay, and what's that? What's that? Oh, yeah. Key value associative array, also called a dictionary. Oh, no, it's fine. I mean, that's cool that you actually use the mathematical term for it. Yeah, so that's simple. That's okay. So now, what is this mix of the square bracket and the indented stuff? So is it valid or not? Yeah, it's valid. So the idea is that at any level you can switch over to the flow form we call the JSON-like form. But once you're in the flow form, you can't go back into the indented form until you go out of that scope. You know, you can't put indented inside of flow. Okay, so now, what do people think this is? Does that look weird to anybody? So we started a hash, but maybe it was a typo on my part, but it wasn't. This is valid, and it's what we call our set notation. So it's just because all the keys have to be unique, and within a set, all of the things have to be unique. So this was a clever idea that we thought up in the Portland when we were probably, you know, just too tired, and we were just thinking of weird ideas. And so there's the corollary. What is this? Right. You got it right. It's a list of dictionaries, or we call it an ordered map. So if you wanted, it's just a list of one key. Thanks. I guess just moving works. Yeah. Yeah, it's called an ordered map or an OMAP in YAML speak. Okay. This. Yeah, that's right. And there's how you do it with the question mark syntax. Can't do that in JSON.
So if you get that in Python, you use Python, will that fail?
Oh, no, in Python it would work fine. This.
You can have a list of the key.
You know, I'm not. Well, let's test it afterwards, because I'm interested. Because I thought that I did this, but maybe I did this in Perl with something that this module actually allowed, weird hash keys using their tie functionality. Okay. Anybody know what that pipe 2 plus thing does? Do you know from the? Right. So these are two modifiers. There's a plus and a minus and a number that you can use as a modifier on a pipe. And what this means is that even though it's indented 4, the indentation starts after 2. And the plus means that any new lines after it are a part of the thing. And a minus means chomp the final new line. Otherwise, it always has one final new line on a literal. So it would look like that. What does this do? So that's another literal, but it's not indented. Yeah, the value is just a Python function definition. Well, this really depends. I think libyaml throws, I think in the spec it's allowed, but this is one of the things where libyaml just said this is too confusing, I'm not going to allow it. So you would have to move over the def at least one space for it to be valid in libyaml. And so this is I think it's one of the last ones. Let me see. Yeah, so this one depends too, but right. So this is the last code example, but it's worth talking about. So the spec says you can't have duplicate keys, but there's no way to enforce it. And when we do the next version of the spec, I want to define YAML at 2 levels, at the syntax level, where it would be allowed, and at the model level that's right before the graph level, that's the YAML-defined graph that's before the native Ruby or Python or Perl. This is what everything goes into. It has very strict rules, and at that level, duplicate keys aren't allowed, but you can enforce it at that level. But then once you define that level, a lot of languages like Haskell have to define that anyway. And they're just on their own because they don't have native hashes and arrays in their language. They just have functions. It's a functional language. A lot of people have to, even Java has to design their own things that work like hashes and arrays. Well, probably arrays are part of Java. I'm not a Java programmer, but I don't think that the normal hashes that we're used to in the dynamic languages, I think they actually have to write their own models. And if they don't, there's other languages that do have to kind of write their own, it's like the DOM, right? There's no DOM built into Perl. You have to implement a DOM if you want to work with SGML stuff. Okay. So this is kind of the wrap-up of it. What's the future of YAML? At several points, I've false started writing a YAML book. There doesn't seem to be any YAML book out there. If anybody's really keen to collaborate on that, I would. In 2011, I started the YAML 2 project, which is it's about creating a YAML 2.0, but it's also about putting more life into YAML again to get people talking and fixing the things that suck and just evolving the language a bit. So that's what I call YAML 2, and it involves a YAML 2.0. Yada is something I came up with 2 months ago because I got yada.org, and I was like, so everybody's using YAML for config, and it was never made for config, and at some point we thought it would be bad for config. But it's the heir apparent because that's what everybody uses it for, right? That's what all you use it for, I'm sure. That and maybe understanding large data structures in memory that you just need to see, but not really do anything with, just for debugging. But it's meant to do a lot more, especially with streaming applications and that kind of thing. So I put up a Yada spec, and it's basically, it says start with YAML and then change these 12 things. And basically make it simpler. And so the thing with Yada is that it's only human writable. It's not machine writable, because that's what configuration is. It's humans putting data in, and then they run into these things that are enforced because of, it has to be a serialization language. So if you take that constraint away, you can make it a lot more lenient of a language. That's something that I've started. I'm working with another guy on, but it's still in the talking phase for Yada. Yeah, and actually, well, there's a, I don't think yada.org is up yet, but there's a yada project on GitHub and everything. So I'll get yada.org up soon with that. There's a spec on my GitHub project. YVal is something I coined last week. So YAML needs a schema language so that you can actually define. And actually, let me just go talk about this. We need a libyaml brought up to 1.2, and eventually we need a 2.0. And so, okay, so that's where Yada lives on GitHub, to answer that question. YVal is what I'm going to call the schema and validation language. And there's actually a guy who needs this for something. No, this was Travis. Travis actually wrote this in Ruby code, a validator for all their Travis YAML things. And I'm like, well, we could just make this, that Ruby code generated from a YAML document that was a format for everybody to use. So that's the first step that I'm going to do in creating YVal is just to turn the Travis stuff that's on GitHub, the validator, into a text format for defining Travis files and any other files. YAML 2 we talked about, YPath. So YPath is like XPath, a query language for pulling stuff out. And there's actually a guy who's working on some voice recognition and synthesis that wants this. So, and so who's actually actively pushing YAML forward? Well, she's right here. And people come and go, but like that's kind of like somebody's got to take care. I mean, if you have something, you own a dog, and like you and your wife, and you split up, somebody's got to take care of that dog, right, or whatever. So it's like I'm taking care of the dog. Clark and Oren are doing other things, and they'll chime up when they need to. I mean, they're still available, but they're not pushing the language forward. The libyaml guys definitely doesn't want to deal with it unless it's like a huge bug that makes him look like the worst programmer in the world. You know, like he responded to the Ruby attacks and stuff like that. But everybody is welcome, and I'll work with anybody that wants to. So how could, this is the last slide, how can you help YAML? Well, you know, with no promotion of this, except for me, a few talks and people just kind of glomming onto it, and why the Lucky Stiff really pushing it into Ruby, and it's kind of spread on its own. It's just like a, you know, all grassroots stuff. But a lot of stuff is really being built on it, and it's not going to go away, and it's going to become more important. It's just like COBOL's still around in the banks. You know, it's always going to be here. So we should probably work on it now. And so if you, I mean, this is kind of like throwing this out there. If you know people who are interested in this, or if you are, or you work for a company where this is actually a big deal and would like to, you know, put developers or fund stuff, please talk to me about that. And I'll just, I mean, I have a job and it's not, but this is really, I mean, taking care of this needs more than it needs me. So, again, take any questions. 10 out of 10.
What kind of format are you looking at for the foundation? What kind of governance model are you?
Well, that was a good question. So I was talking to, it was Brian Aker was, I don't know if anybody's heard of that guy. He was, yeah, because I actually met a salt. I used to live in Brian's house, and he lives down the street from me. And I was over visiting one day, and one of the main salt dudes was there. He was a short, skinny guy, kind of small, skinny guy. Anyway, yeah, I'd like to introduce me to him again, if you could. So he was working for HP. He was head of their whole cloud computing thing for a while. And he's still associated with them. And he was saying, you know, I could get HP to throw money at this if you wanted to form a foundation. And then I'm like, well, I don't even know where to start. And he was suggesting, you know, modeling it after the Apache Foundation or something like that. And that turning over the governance of the domains and that kind of thing. I don't know. Yeah. It's a discussion that needs to happen. But do you have ideas for that? It seems like maybe you do. Okay. Great. Excellent. Well, thank you very much for coming. I'd like to, you know, talk to all 1,000 of you, but just take me too long. I'm just kidding. Thank you very much.